Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Sug Talks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges, and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by John McNiff, Vice President of Global COE for Supply Chain Operations at SAP, and Ian Mallinson, IT Director at Warburton. So, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Craig.
All right.
And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing digital twins, what they are, and whether they can supercharge your SAP implementations, perhaps. And just before we get into that conversation, for this week's icebreaker, I thought I'd ask you, what is your favourite gadget? Now, while you think about that a little, I kind of cast my mind over this myself as I was asking that question, and I suppose is it favourite? Is it worse or what? I've got to say my mobile, because I can just do everything from it, wherever I am in the world. The downstairs side of that is invariably you can be reached wherever you are in the world. So it has its pros and its cons from my perspective. So, John.
It's a tricky icebreaker, actually, that, Craig, because you would have to go along. I would have to kind of go along with you, but I don't want to. And the reason I say that is, the world has obviously moved on and everything can be done on the mobile these days. So it is effectively pretty much every gadget under the sun in one place. Having said all of that, I've kind of gone back to my roots a little bit at the moment, and my daughter's just hit secondary school or high school, I think we call it these days. And we bought a laptop that's not for work purposes, where I've actually started writing a bit of programming again to try and teach her how to code and play games and things like that. I'm quite enjoying that at the moment. So I think I'm going to have to go old school retro and say right now I'm enjoying a good old fashioned laptop with a 16-inch screen.
Oh, wow, fantastic. Oh, that's great. Getting back into coding, like it. And Ian?
It's a bit of a similar theme. As soon as you said it, I just thought, well, it's my Apple Watch, isn't it? So we're techies, aren't we, really? Literally last night I bought a mechanical watch. I'm a mechanical engineer originally, so, watches are meant to just tell you the time, aren't they? And I bought an Autowind mechanical watch because that's my background. But like the phone does everything, so does a watch. Watch is monitoring everything. Watch is monitoring your fitness, all of those things. And it's just incredibly powerful. That's mine.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you both for that, guys. And just a little introduction as we move on to our main topic. And just to start things off, if I may, I'd like to ask if you could briefly outline your role and who it is you work for. Ian, if you'd like to go first, please.
Yeah, no problem. So I've been IT director at Warburton's for, I don't know, eight or more years now. Hopefully most of the listeners will have heard of Warburton's, biggest bakery business in the UK, only in the UK, but big in the UK. And we're UK's most chosen bakery, grocery brand, actually. Family-owned business in its 5th generation now, and delivering 15 million Warburton's products a week across the UK, direct to store, a daily fresh supply chain. And it's probably worth me just saying a little bit more about me, because it'll probably help when we get to talk about digital twins in more detail. But I've had a career of 3/3. The first part, I said I'm an engineer, was really in factories, factory management, that type of background. Middle section was in supply chain, and the final third, probably as it will be, in IT leadership. And we'll come on to talk more about how twins might feature in each of those 3 areas.
Thank you. And John?
Yeah, so I'm John McNiff from SAP. I'm in the Global Centre of Excellence, as I said before, for supply chain and operations. I've been here at SAP for, I think, about 15 years through acquisition, actually, of a manufacturing shop floor software back in 2008 when SAP was on its vision for a perfect plant. I think the tagline was at that point in time. Some of you older listeners might remember that one. But done a bunch of things here. Right now in the COE, I work with the solution management, product teams and the go-to-market teams on really strategic topics, things that are important for us right now. But over the time at SAP, mostly focused on supply chain and manufacturing. I ran the business for supply chain for Northern Europe, EMEA North, for about 4.5 years before going back to the global job. And I also ran solution management globally for a couple of years on the topic that old school we'd call PLM. And as part of that, introduced this idea of the network of digital twins, which sounded very grandiose back in the day, when really digital twin was becoming the next big buzz. And as usual, and I'm sure we'll get to it, probably massively overhyped and taken in many different directions since then, to mass confusion of everyone. So yeah, some experience around those topics. Also, more to come.
Thank you both very much. And if I can just stay with you, John, if I may, what could you just give us a brief introduction to the concept of a digital twin?
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to be brief these days, but I mean, if you take it right back to the basics, it's a digital representation of something physical is kind of where it started, and you can go back 20, 30 years to the engineering world. In PLM, in the aerospace world, they were creating digital mock-ups, which became digital twins for the purposes of design and R&D, and trying to figure out, could you simulate things without actually put in the physical product together at that point in time. So that was kind of the original forerunner. Has been around for a long time. It's very old, and in many cases, whilst the definition seems to be applied differently, some of those principles are still the same. So it's a digital representation of something physical. We can argue whether it's from the birth of that physical thing or if it's before the physical thing has even been created, but ultimately you're trying to represent something digital so you can see what's going on, and so that you can simulate conditions on it to come out with some outcome. So that's kind of the origins. I would say really again got reinvigorated as a terminology, and really became, I would say, when the hype cycle really kicked in around the whole boom of IoT, putting sensors on things, and now being able to, rather than in design, but actually monitor assets in the field. And so the operational side of assets and products, for seeing what's going on within those assets or products, or again, more to come, anything pretty much post that. But again, being able to do simulations and use some of the clever, intelligent technologies we've got to try and figure out when something might break. So can you predict that something might fail? Could you simulate if something went through continued further conditions? Could be weather data or erosion or whatever it might be. Especially in heavy asset-intensive industries, those use cases really were booming, I would say, a few years ago, linked to big data, IoT type stories. But since then, it's kind of getting applied everywhere, and you can rebel against that. But the reality is, it kind of works, right? Something, if you can digitally replicate something, could be a factory, which I think is the case that Ian was alluding to in some of our preamble. What's happening in my production? Can I start to monitor that, but also predict when things might change? Could be a process itself. We're doing a lot right now, especially around supply chains, which again, happy to talk about in a bit more detail later, but same type of thing. Some people think of it as just visualizing the physical world of the supply chain, the factory, whatever it is. But the reality is, what you really want to be doing is, can I take that digital data to simulate, replicate, use intelligent technologies to predict or scenario plan different outcomes, right? So those are typically a lot of the use cases that we see.
Thank you. And from what you were saying there, obviously, you talked about components, we talked about maintenance in manufacturing, etc. And then going back again to when you talked about where SAP was looking for the perfect plant, if you like. So is that something with predictive maintenance, etc., that, you know, a digital twin can help and support in perhaps? How does that look from an SAP perspective in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, really, if I go back to my role where we were bringing together the product world and the asset world, and you know, everyone's talked in PLM about how do I get engineering data downstream and get feedback to engineering, super critical. Talked about it for lots and lots of years, but with the introduction of sensors and IoT, there became a lot of opportunity to really start to do, but again, people have been doing for a long time, right? Monitoring assets, equipment, whatever it might be, and use that data to maybe say when you were going to maintain an asset. It could be if something were breaking, you know, and you needed to see it virtually. But increasingly with the use of sensors and some of the clever algorithms that we've got, like predictive algorithms for maintenance, or it could be predictive quality, it could be all kinds of other optimization scenarios, you know, including a lot of the engineering intensive physics, thermodynamic type things, that you can take what you know about the state of that asset, so what components are in it, how heavily has it been used, what types of conditions am I sensing on that, and start to make predictions around when something might fail. So predictive maintenance, I would say, would be the most classic example that people really started to go crazy about with the whole IoT, industrial IoT scenario. So absolutely, but I think we've gone a lot further than that now, actually.
Okay. And Ian, from a Warburton's perspective, is digital twin something that you guys utilize or are planning to?
Yeah, I don't know whether the textbook would say we've got a digital twin, but when you asked me a question on a recent podcast, I did come up with that phrase myself. So I think we're towards that now. And where are we looking at it? We're looking at it mainly in supply chain. We have a daily fresh supply chain where product is baked, shipped, and delivered in a single day. So the supply chain velocity is quick, and we've always been able to model, you know, bakery loadings, warehouse loadings, van delivery profiles, those types of things. We tended to do that in quite a static way, or across, you know, weekly, monthly type horizons, and we had a sense that modeling that, not in real time, but simulating real time, simulating the real time movements of product through the chain, will probably give us a different perspective on how to optimize. So we did, with a boutique data science business, set something up, which is fed by SAP and a number of other applications, feeding transaction and execution level data from the bakeries, from the warehouses, and from our transport fleet, to then be able to I know we kind of backward schedule and make sure that all the model represents the truth as we know it, and then we can forward predict and ask what if assessments and certain scenario. What if we open another warehouse here? What if we produce product A in bakery Z instead of bakery X? What does that do to product flow, and what does that do to supply chain optimization and, you know, reducing transport miles and all those types of things? And what for me, what's different about that is it's simulation of discrete movement rather than aggregated product movements. And that's the nearest thing we have now to a digital twin. We are feeding that with real-time information, so it's getting the truest sense of our network at any point in time, and we're able to then make assessments about what the next steps might be. And that's the nearest thing. John can score me out of 10 as to how much that is a twin, but we're attempting to create a virtual version of our supply chain in order to help us make better decisions.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't possibly try and score any of our valued customers, especially on his products. I consume so much out of 10. But yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. But again, I think it highlights the point of this divergence of, digital twin being for something very discrete product or asset, and largely driven from, let's call it, the engineering intensive world, coming into the transactional and the process type of the world as a term. And ultimately, as I said before, I think you can apply it to almost anything, which is a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is, it makes sense. If you've got digital data around some product, network, in your case, production line, even process within your end-to-end estate, which is where I said you kind of got this idea of digital on digital, right? So can you actually have a digital twin of the way your information flows throughout the network? That's a digital twin. So it's kind of gone in all different directions. But I like your scenario a lot, actually, and because it's one in supply chain that's very dear to my heart. And of course, it's what people like Gartner are talking about a lot, and a lot of people are using the terminology. Again, I think there are nuances to it. We within S4 ECC, we kind of have this master system of record, which holds all of this transactional data. And for quite a few years, with tools like integrated business planning, we've been trying to do some of what you described, right? Which kind of use analytical cloud-based tools to scenario plan and look at impacts on, maybe there's going to be a late delivery, or I've got some quality issues, or there's a downtime in production, or there's, COVID was obviously the marketing heaven for supply chain that came along and gave us every scenario under the sun, right? Factories breaking down, cost of materials going up, you name it. Can you take those signals and then scenario plan and simulate to give a different outcome? And that, that's very much is still what people are trying to do. That's all the heart of resilience. It's getting visibility to what's occurring, but then being able to make decisions based upon that information. The challenge has always been twofold. One is getting the data that exists into that twin of the supply chain, because it's ultimately a network of many companies and information that exists outside of your own systems. And then the second is, there are so many potential correlations or data and information that might impact a decision, which is not always known, is how you really apply, how you see the wood for the trees, right? How do you effectively see through this noise to take the stuff which is really going to impact your supply chain and some of those decisions?
Yeah, just something you triggered something in my mind there, John. Perhaps to our advantage there is the part of the chain that we're modelling is from bakery to store, but we own that. We're not dependent on third-party logistics providers. We do that ourselves, and that work differently for different companies. But the advantage we have is it's our data, and it's all at execution level in SAP. And the partner that we work with was very complimentary about what made it possible or easier than otherwise is because there was a structured data set sat in HANA, time-stamped, all within a single architecture. And we might come on to the complexities of not having that later, but that was certainly a thing that made it easier for us. But if you're really trying to model a true supply chain where there's many parties involved, that's tricky, I would imagine. We haven't even tried that.
Yeah, it's absolutely tricky, and I again, with my slightly ironic hat on, I would say I would, of course, all data should exist in SAP. That's a given. But the reality is that's not always the case, and especially in something that a process is under your control, absolutely. And I think you could say the same about production. Typically, in production, it's very real time execution focused with transactional data of orders coming into the shop floor, how you monitor those machines. But good scenarios for that that type of twin. I think where we're seeing some interesting cases now within the network, there's really two angles I would come to. One is in this resilient visibility command center scenario planning, and the other one is on when you come to the sort of sustainability and data provenance angle, where you have to prove where product materials has come from and where it's going. And so there's another kind of digital twin of the end product to be discussed there. But just taking the network or scenario side of things, there's a lot going on in that area where we can improve. There's no one's perfect, because clearly, as we said, most people don't do business on their own, and therefore a lot of the information that can impact your decisions, whether it be around cost, time to deliver, your sustainability footprint, the ethical use of your materials, a lot of that exists outside of the walls. But what is changing is the technology in particular, and also, of course, the use of, I'm going to do the first one. I'm going to say the words artificial intelligence on this podcast and just throw that in. But with things like AI now, we've got maybe that ability to start seeing the wood for the trees in all of the data, and then you've got to get that data. So what's going on is there are lots and lots of great sources of information out there, particularly around things like risk, around simulation of information out in the supply chain. We're working on the planning side with companies like Everstream, they've got these vulnerability scans. They can look at, if there's an event occurs around cyber, around weather, around geopolitical, can you start to figure out how that impacts me as a supply chain person, how it impacts my orders, my material suppliers, when probably you don't really know where all of your materials are actually coming from. There's lots of good stories about people who thought they were multi-sourcing a particular component or a particular piece of equipment, when ultimately you follow the network back and they all come back to this same location in a part of the world that might be under strain on the supply chain at some point in the future. So people are getting really good at getting that data. If we can start to pull that information into that scenario, we're doing things on the network side. If you think about the logistics network with tracking and tracing events, that we can not only see those events from a logistic perspective, but can we pull that into, again, the planning and the command centers and the scenario planning to say, all right, that shipment, maybe it's half full or maybe it's going to be late from that particular logistics provider. By connecting to that network and getting that signal before the material docks into your warehouse and you scan it into goods in, if I could know that these things were happening a week out, that it's maybe only 50% full or it's going to be a day late, I could actually rejig my manufacturing plans, as an example, or re-optimize. So starting to think about how you pull all this external data in to that digital twin, that's becoming another, that's the holy grail at the moment for a resilient and agile supply chain, I would say.
And from what you both just been talking about there, obviously it seems the case with everything these days are it's all about the data, data quality, data accuracy, data governance, and getting the right partners, etc. And to me, from a layman perspective, it sounds like this could be quite a costly exercise. Is there a cost-benefit analysis to be done before embarking on these kind of projects?
Well, maybe cost-benefit. Yeah, for sure. Come back to that. I think it depends on the data, to your point. Yes, and in our example, whether we describe it as a digital twin or not, but the nearest thing we have to one, even though not all of it was an SAP, but most of it was. What you're feeding the simulation has to be quality data. So I do think that any organisation, before thinking seriously about doing this, has to have a reasonable level of data maturity, data literacy, because otherwise you're just going to feed it with stuff that's going to give you erroneous recommendations. So I think diving into things like this is a really great transformational idea. If you're on a flaky data foundation, you're gonna get directed to a false outcome. But in terms of the cost benefit on it, I mean, data accessibility is getting to John's point. IoT sensors everywhere, much easier to get the data and much cheaper to store the data than ever before. My sense is, as long as you choose the right application and you choose an application where there's sufficient data reasonably well available to get at, it'll pay. Because the idea that you can simulate this virtually before doing it for real, before laying down assets or before making a different decision to supply a customer in a different way and so on, it's very likely to pay back as long as you're careful about the test case, where you start and where you deploy. That'd be my view. But then I'm an advocate.
Thank you, Ian. Understand that.
We know our community, but we don't know yours yet. Why not share the benefits of your UKI Sub membership with those who don't know about us? The UKI Sub referral scheme rewards you for helping to grow and develop our community. You can check out the link in the description to find out more about how you can get involved. Terms and conditions apply. We hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast.
And just on the risk side, you touched on some of the risks and the challenges. Is there potentially the capability, I suppose, or is there a likelihood that we could end up being too dependent on technology? Do we need a contingency and almost like a human fallback on these things, on implementing these kind of?
Well, if I can go again there, if you don't mind, John. As I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about it, and I sorry, in my notes, I'm thinking, well, humans are important too here, because these simulations are complex, and you need a certain level of human capability to tame those simulations, to make sure they get fed appropriately, to make sure the data pipelines are right and appropriate, but also to interpret the outcomes. Because I don't know if you saw the parcel delivery story where the chatbot got things wrong yesterday or the day before, was making fairly unintelligent responses, which were shared widely. There's still a place for human interpretation of results, and even I think for humans to think about what the appropriate scenario should be. What are you going to ask this thing to simulate? And so I think there's a place for human creativity and human talent, and that if we're not careful, we could get lost in a world of analysis without clear cause.
Yeah, I would agree with you quite strongly. It's the one thing that AI especially does. It turns a lot of technology discussions into philosophy very quickly. But what is clear is we are absolutely going faster than we've ever gone. Technology, it's hard to keep on top. I personally have booked myself on a course to go and try and figure out what does AI really mean. What are they beyond the blurb and the cyborgs and Rishi Sunak talking to Elon Musk? Beyond the nonsense, what are we really talking about? How do we apply? What does it mean for us in the business context? And it's so amazing, some of the capabilities that are out and are now general purpose, which is the big difference, right? It's becoming general purpose technology, that it's easy to get carried away and say, yeah, we just throw these algorithms at stuff and we don't need people anymore. Well, that's ridiculous. Right? We're a long way from that. And it might be that more and more of the easier to make decisions are becoming more automated, and we can, become more productive. I think that's the obvious outcome that I can see. There's clearly going to be some impact on the way we do our jobs, but are we not going to be doing our jobs? We're way away from that. But I think back also to your question before, Craig, none of this stuff works. This was my learning around AI. None of it works unless you've got the data. And unless you've got the data, it's trusted, it's sanitized, it's responsible. We know it's not based on bias. We know it's not based on, hallucinations being the big word at the moment around things like the large language models, but grounded in reality. You can throw things at data, but unless it's thrown at the right data, you will waste a lot of power and computing consumption, because you can burn up a lot of compute time running around in things which are not necessary. So striking that balance between, have I got the right data? How do I make sure I don't narrow the scope of my algorithm or my search or my model or whatever it is too tightly that I miss things? But on the flip side, you need to give some controls. So there's definitely a massive increase in the need for data prep, data science, making sure that we've got data context, which again I would think for SAP, and what you'll hear a lot around with business AI, having that business context, number one, in our analytical platform, rather than throwing everything into data ponds, puddles, and lakes all over the show, is absolutely incredibly important. And that's why we talk about the intelligent suite or enterprise, because you're talking across functions. Can I maintain context with the data that we own, but also bringing that with the external data and being on top of it? That's a huge task for the time to come, and grounding this data in reality and knowing that it's data provenance and that it's real. That is a massive task for us. And to Ian's point, augmenting the decisions and validating decisions and focusing on more value-add decisions is absolutely the direction of travel, I think, for the time being. I will just one last comment on that. What is very apparent, we've trained ourselves for many years to think in our functional silos, and the systems that we created were largely digital representations of paper-based systems, that were constrained by. So if I'm in supply planning, or if I'm in demand planning, or I'm in manufacturing, we know our scope and we focus on that scope, and we know that very, very well. There are things outside of our remit which it would be great to bring into our decision support systems that we've not always done, and people don't really know where to focus. So again, bringing that kind of data science together with domain expertise and cross-functional knowledge in a business is really important. I just have one example of that. Back in the day, I can remember going to an A&D company who set their manufacturing KPIs up. It was all about efficiency and the way the line cell ran. And the guy said to me in a Texas accent, he said, "I can make a lot of crap real fast." And that, that was because it's running well, keep making. But, if economically you've not got the storage space for that, or you're not making to the right demand, or, you're making some product that's less profitable than another product, to his point, you're making all scrap or crap, whichever you prefer. And there's information out there that can inform those decisions. It's now, how do we get that information to people who will be able to understand it together with the technology, not one or the other.
Okay. Thank you. And just looking at, we talked about the supply chain, the manufacturing, and how it can help there, but also we talked about processes. And call me Captain Slow here, but I've just kind of made the link now, I think, between SAP Signavio, bringing it back to the world of SAP, and modeling of business processes, and giving that insight and being able to model and improve business processes. So in effect, if we looked at SAP Signavio, for instance, is that in effect a digital twin for your business processes?
If you look at parts of Signavio like Process Insights or any process mining tool, what they do, first time I saw one of these, and it wasn't Signavio, it was kind of one of those moments where you go, oh, why have we not been doing this for years before, right? Because without having to really pre-think a lot of things other than to go and access the system, you could very clearly show very quickly with process insights, process mining, where you've got bottlenecks and where things were going off the happy path, whether it be procure to pay or within manufacturing or production orders sat in loops. Without having to pre-model this stuff, it just lifts and demonstrates, what is actually happening in those end-to-end processes. That's where I said before, it's kind of a digital twin of digital data to some degree, right? And whilst, it's the second level of the digital twin, but absolutely, it is effectively a digital twin of end-to-end processes where you can get access to the information that's modeled. And obviously with Signavio, it's all tapped and readily available to see. So I think it's a good use case. I did also see a really nice example also with a partner who was talking about data-driven Kaizen in the manufacturing world, where they were using process insights on top of all manufacturing data sources and starting to link that data together with key performance indicators. To normally you can kind of tell if you against your KPIs whether you're in or out of your tolerances that you've set for your business rules. But by combining it with process insights, you could really see, okay, this is where I've got a big bottleneck actually. Yes, I might be down on my OEE or my on-time delivery, but here's where the bottlenecks are occurring, and allowing them to use that data to go and start to inspect and make improvements for those areas. So, again, we're being a bit liberal with the terminology, and to Ian's point before, what really is it? Well, it's been defined many different ways, but it is effectively, that's what it is. It's a digital twin of the process, and effectively, therefore, of the end-to-end enterprise as it's mapped.
I agree. No, I get that. I mean, as an engineer, I'm kind of, no, I want the sensors on the machines. I want to know what's going on from the machines in the production line, not from the processes that are over the top of them. But I think, Signavio could be certainly a point some areas of focus at. I can well imagine that.
Thank you. And John, are there any other kind of solutions, I suppose, from the SAP perspective, each chance to sell, that obviously have that digital twin capability? So if a customer's thinking, I want to look at digital twin and implementing it in this area, if they're already an SAP customer, are there actually solutions there where this technology is involved? We already touched on Signavio, and anything else?
Well, I mean, again, since it becomes such a broad gamut, you could go all over the place. I mean, you could take very simple examples like taking 3D visualization, out of the engineering world and with enterprise product development. In the old days, we started with this visual enterprise concept, but taking that model and being able to reuse it in all scenarios. So on the shop floor where you need product information to create work instructions, you're dealing with these in warehouses, and in asset and service, we're using augmented reality together with 3D digital models in the classic sense of a digital twin of a product or asset to actually improve those processes. What do you pick? How do I fix things? And I think Ian's case in supply chain that we talked about, more the upstream side of things, we're working, as I said, with people like Everstream to take their risk information to simulate the network, but we've also got a partnership around integrated business planning with a company called Cosmotech, which exactly describe themselves as the digital twin of the network, because their purpose is to simulate how things are. Signavio we talked about, again, within the production world, we're using digital twins of the process itself to measure OEE, to measure performance, and so on. And because the exciting stuff kind of downstream that I like, especially when you start to get into this networked view of the world, and increasingly with the regulation around provenance of materials and traceability, we have our own network, of course, but we're very much active in the industry networks like Catena X, which is an automotive-driven initiative. But in there, things like the battery passports and part traceability, you need to be able to transfer through multiple tier members of the supply network product information to show, whether it be the green token for sustainability purposes, or whether it be materials to show that they've not come from some deforested area of the world, right? So that network scenario is creating digital twins of products, of batches, of materials for the purposes of understanding what's in it, but again, also starting to, being able to do simulations around some of those things. So the concept is pretty much everywhere, I think, as you would expect in the digital economy, to the point where we're almost dropping the word digital these days.
What is real anymore?
Yeah, because it almost, I don't want to sidetrack, but it almost brings me back to the question you raised before. I read a brilliant book. There's a guy called Robert Harris, who's one of my favorite authors, but he wrote this story about when you started reading it, I just, if it's one of his, I pick it up and I read it. That's what I do. But he wrote Fatherland and some others, these where he kind of predicts, he writes a novel in an alternate scenario, future or past. And in this one, it felt like you were in a Dark Ages religious novel. But actually, the synopsis of the story is it turns out we're in the future. And what he does really well is he drags up real artifacts and materials as part of his investigative discovery through the novel. And he drops the little things in there which are really fascinating, right? Which are things that we all need to pay attention to. Like in a truly digital economy where cash is digital, the supply chain is digital. Big cities like London are about 5 days from starvation. If suddenly the power went off, because you need some kind of backup system. The way we interact, most people's systems are set up now only to do things digital. Most of the tracing of the materials is digital, and so on and so on. And the hypothesis about the scenarios, talks about how could it happen. Things like cyber attacks. It could be an old-fashioned nuclear war, of course, but more likely, things like cyber attacks taking systems down. So we need to think two things very hard about what those backup systems are and how humans take over again, absolutely. But also you need to put your data with people you can trust to maintain and control their security and not have it spread all over the place. Right? And that's why I think big companies like SAP are somewhat to be more trusted in that world where data becomes very mission critical.
Thank you. And as we come towards the end of our conversation, I just thought I'd kind of ask a quick question as we close down and look at, how do you think the digital twin scenario will evolve in the future? Ian?
Just a couple of thoughts on that. I think that creating networks of twins, I think it's something that John has kind of mentioned. So, as different organizations create twins of their entities or parts of their organizations, the fact that you can glue those together to create a wider simulation, we'll end up in the Matrix, won't we, if we're not careful? But I can imagine twins talking to twins over time. I believe that's something that could be very likely. But one of the things that really interests me is the idea that you create a digital twin of a human. And there's already some of that stuff going on that, you can, wearable technology is monitoring what the human's doing. The twin knows what the human is and what it's made up of. And, I'm not a medical expert, and then by monitoring what the human's doing or what the human's ingesting, can make predictions about what whether that's a good or a bad thing for the human. But I think that could become very powerful for the future.
Ooh, who knows? It could be 3 chatbots just having a chat here at the moment, and none of us are human at all. Mind you, many people have probably said I'm not human, full stop, but there we go. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think actually, we could go many directions, but I think Ian's touched on 2 really, really key areas. If you combine the digital twin idea with artificial intelligence and some of the advances and the speed that's going, the area of healthcare and medicine is clearly drug discovery is absolutely prime and huge for developments in that area. And then secondly, we talked about this ever expanding digital economy where you're not in control of all of the data. You need to interact with different organizations, but also, if we think about digital twins of cars, of AGVs, or things moving around in your plant, there is communication required between those digital twins and digital representations. So there is a lot going on, and SAP's quite close to many of the sort of industry bodies. I talked about Catena X before. One of the things that they're looking at is how do you allow trusted sharing of relevant data and information between organizations that need to transact together, that they can know that their data is secure, but they can pass what they need to pass to the people to meet the regulations and transact much more freely. So there's an organizational side to it. There's also standards being built around the way the actual devices themselves would interact. And again, we're working very closely with that. It can't just be SAP in isolation. It has to be that there is some consistent language or standard for entities to interact and share the data, but also, the things themselves that need to communicate with each other. So that's it's a massive area of development and is not going to get fixed anytime soon. So I think we've got lots and lots of potential to improve for quite some years in those areas. But they are starting to take off now. The concept of the network and networks across shared platforms and using consistent standards as much as possible.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I just wondered there, I wondered if a digital twin can just, be capable of random thoughts as well. Could they walk into a room, my digital twin walk into a room and then forget why the hell they actually walked into that room? Probably not, but anyway. But Ian, John, thank you. Thank you for your time and your insights today. Really do appreciate that. And thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. So please make sure you do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep smiling.